Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Two Existential Dudes podcast. This week, our topic will be addiction.
Yes. So, as always, we got to start. How do we want to define this? I took the time. I wanted to find because addiction is often it's a very oftenly coined term. I wanted to find all the most trusted sources, so I used the American Psychiatric Association, Oxford, and Merriam-Webster to find our definitions. And just to read through them here so we can get a starting place. I'll start with Oxford, as it is the most general. They say the fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. The use of addicted
They
in that
used
sense.
the word to...
This is Oxford, yes. Then we have the American Psychiatric Association. They write a complex condition, a brain disease that is manifested by a compulsive substance, and its use despite harmful consequences. And then Merriam-Webster writes what I think is the most accurate one that we can start with. They write a compulsive, chronic, physiological, or psychological need for a habit-forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects.
And just so we're clear, I think to be medically classified as addiction, it has to physically alter brain chemistry. That's
I would
correct,
agree.
isn't it?
I would agree. I believe that's the case.
And it, of course, influences your behavior and creates a compulsive desire to use the drug. I say drug in quotations because it can be more than just what we typically think is drugs.
Yes, for the duration of this podcast, probably drug will be used a lot as just the filler word, if you will, for all the different categories, which we will go over.
Absolutely.
Each one of them.
And in most of these cases, the addiction comes from a chemical in the brain called dopamine that is released. It's the, what would you call it, like the pleasure chemical or the
happy
satisfaction.
juice. Yeah, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the full science is like dopamine is released between the synapses of your neural networks, and certain drugs either stop the blockage of that or release more. There's a lot of them, and they do different things based on the type of drug you're taking or the type of experience you're having. Leave it at that. And while we're no expert on dopamine and serotonin and all that stuff, that is the basis for what this notion is, particularly of addiction, in that it provides some form of pleasure in this form, most often through a chemically altering way of that changing the synapses, or synapses, however you want to say it.
So should we go over the different types, or do you think that's a good place to start?
I think that's the best place to start.
Okay, so at least the few I wrote in the description were drugs, like conventional drugs as you would normally think of them. Alcohol, which is itself a drug, but is different because most of the other drugs you would be talking about would be stimulants, whereas alcohol is a depressant for your nervous system. Pornography, which is addictive, of course. Sugar, which you'd probably be hard for us to find anyone in America today that is not addicted in some form, in some level, to sugar.
The best irony is the fact that you're holding a grape soda right now.
This is not a grape soda.
It's not. Oh, what is it?
We're going to get into this.
Oh, it's a prop. I see.
This is a prop. Yes.
This is a secret tool that we're going to use later.
And the final one we put is social media, which I guess we can tie that back into last week's conversation.
Yeah, that'll be a nice, I think, a great way to close it out with that whole notion. The only thing I would add to that is, most of these are physical objects or actions. I would add to this, like, activities, if you will. This includes pleasurable activities, in addition to things like just things that you find fun, such as running on a track or practicing your instrument, which I would argue can
Yeah.
have the same effect to some degree.
I guess I wasn't really thinking about that when I was considering the description for this episode. That there are indeed positive addictions, as so long as you use them in the correct way.
Yes.
Should we? And I guess we could kind of start there.
Yeah, certainly.
Like, especially, have you ever heard of the runner's high?
I have, yes.
That
I have.
Not just runners, but athletes, when they're in the zone, so to say, they become. It's almost euphoric in a strange way, because you're also in pain most of the time. But there's
Masochist.
there's also a very fine line in the brain, at least, between pain and pleasure. But
that's exactly masochist. I would ask then, is this a physical thing that actually happens, or an entirely mental dilemma? Really,
I would say mostly, almost entirely mental.
Interesting.
I mean, there are some cases where when you're done, you feel a sense of accomplishment, and that could be considered part of the high you get from it.
Right.
And that would differ from these negative drugs, because when you get off those, you're hungover, you feel guilty, you feel useless, things like that. So that's where these positive addictions come in.
Yeah, I would say it's important to make that distinction between mental addictions and physical addictions. For example, cigarettes, which we have been raised and, dare I say, indoctrinated, the whole notion of that cigarettes have whatever chemical it is in it that keeps you addicted all the time to it.
Nicotine.
There it is, thank you. Even though you know about the incredibly harmful effects of that, and we've been, again, indoctrinated into that, which is, I mean, they're bad, so that's fine in that case. But while something like a cigarette is a physical, the nicotine is physically altering you, there's other cases, I feel, things like social media, where it's significantly more of this mental shift in it, in that it's social media specifically, I think of attention, and just getting that attention of it, which does, again, to go back to our definitions, it does release happiness juice, but it's not, the social media, which is not a physical thing in and of itself, is not physically acting upon you.
Yeah.
Rather, your brain is acting upon what it sees and changing its own dopamine levels, or how much it releases or how much it blocks.
Certainly. Another one of the positive things, we've talked on our own about the idea of being addicted to water. And as he gets a drink of water. And
so good.
I don't know if there's scientific validity to that. I mean, I guess you could say, since every human needs water, you could classify that as an addiction, because like withdrawal there involves dying.
Right. Withdrawal is death. Water is just poison. That's all it is. Just takes a long time to get to you. Yeah, that's interesting, because it really depends on how broad we want our definition to be of this. Because based on our current one, I suppose drinking water does give you that element of that pleasure and that success feeling again, just like the runner's high.
Especially if it's after the run.
Yes, particularly. Although I think I would classify it as an addiction, with the exception that it doesn't necessarily have many harmful consequences. There are issues of overhydration, and you really don't need as much water as people say you do. But there isn't really a harm in doing so, other than overhydration, which is not super common.
And in almost all situations, drinking water is better than drinking almost anything else.
Yes, yeah. Unless the water is not of good quality.
Oh, yeah.
Then that is a separate issue, in which then it's safer to have a soda, actually, which is not...
Or a beer, as Europe,
as Europe would say.
Europe knew for thousands of years.
You're a pirate? We don't have water. We just have rum. That's all we got. You don't like rum? How about rum on the rocks?
So that takes me back to this soda-like object bottle or can that I'm holding.
Soda-like object bottle.
This is a bubbly, not sponsored. It is a sparkling water, blackberry flavored, and I use this as a representation of the fact that I have been soda free for more than a year and a half now, which I am very proud of. And
good job.
And I want to use this as a sort of as a personal experience for the benefits of overcoming an addiction.
Okay.
In this case, it would be sugar. And while I still, of course, eat way more sugar than I should, the cutting out soda has allowed my, I guess, me to become more sensitive to sugar. In that, one thing I found when I was researching for this is when you overcome an addiction, it actually, while your overall levels of dopamine drop, the dopamine receptors in your brain that actually what would you say?
Accept the dopamine.
Yeah.
Or block it.
Those, you form more of those, which allows you to, which essentially undoes the numbing feeling that you have to these things.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I do love there's a weird, and you kind of exhibited here, there's this interesting notion of comparing getting off of like soda or sugar to like getting off cigarettes or alcohol. And it's like, I'm so proud of you. I am proud of you. It is an impressive feat. I wish I had that. God, soda's just too good for me. Dear Lord. But I do find it a little weird that it's almost on the same level as someone who's like gone to sponsorships and gone to rehab to like get out of alcohol, and they're like, I'm alcohol free since like a month. It's a very odd notion, I feel.
Yeah, it is.
And yet they're related, I think.
It could be because obviously people are so unhealthy, especially in this country, and that could have something to do with it. Whereas people die of addictions, there's also complications that arise from addiction to food or sugar.
Well, certainly. I forget the exact term, but one of the main causes of obesity is that form of addiction to food, particularly food with substantial amounts of sugar in it. Notably, McDonald's has this issue pretty tremendously, and that's why there's a number of documentaries that document how. Yes, the documentaries document the things, as the title would imply, because words do mean things. But there's a number of these shows that document how these people become incredibly addicted to it in the same way that people get incredibly addicted to marijuana or alcohol or any other kind of drug, really.
I think that's a good segue. That's almost become a meme around here because I say that every time he makes a point that I have something that it leads to. So
you are the master of segues. I gotta give you that.
That being said, therefore,
nonetheless,
you can combine any two ideas by just saying nevertheless.
Yes, drugs. Nevertheless, potato chips. Actually,
no.
Anyways, you had a point.
That speaks volumes to how our world is kind of set up in a way that makes it almost impossible to avoid these addictions, especially the food one. Because, like, obviously the companies that it's their job to sell you their product, which is their gross, disgusting food, and they've gotten so good at advertising and playing on people's innate instincts to just consume.
Yeah, you'd notice, and I'll provide another piece of evidence if I don't forget it, but you'll notice that there are very few advertisements that appeal to logic or any kind of authority. They're almost always apathetic in the rhetorical sense of using emotions to get to you. The burger is incredibly savory and makes you salivating looking at it, like Pavlov's dog. And then, like, political ads try to make you mad.
Yeah.
Anger especially is very volatile and works extremely well every time. And we talked about that last episode, how it's all about...
If you didn't watch last episode, go watch it.
Do it. But to provide a bit of historical evidence to that point, I believe it was around the 1950s and 60s, there was an interesting, particularly in Europe, advertisements were not controlled very much. While they're free today, obviously, they are restricted in what they can present, particularly in places like Germany and France, and to a lesser degree the United States. You would have ads with flagrant nudity on them, which by European standards is a little more acceptable, but by American standards is, again, flagrant, and but very weird to look at. But even in the United States, you have these ads that were, I'll use the word sexualized, even if they weren't about like actual intimate actions. In the same way that burgers are incredibly savory and make you want to I'm going to stop that sentence there, but you can see where that's going. It's like turning into some high schooler's fan fiction, right?
Yeah.
And it is interesting that they have restricted that to some degree today, but I would definitely agree, and that's a point. You can see that uncontrolled, it immediately develops into that, because that was only 100 years maybe since the real birth of pictorial advertisements, as demonstrated in our last episode, which you should go watch and then subscribe and then like.
Yes.
Anyways.
I think that is, even if it's not in a sexualized manner, that happens in advertisements where the thing you're watching has absolutely nothing to do with the product itself. At first, at least it was making you feel emotional about the product, but at some point it gets absurd. The
only case of things trying to appeal to logistics I've seen today are in ads deliberately aimed as healthy food or fitness. But even still, particularly the fitness ones are often about are trying to get to pride. Yeah. And not jealousy of wanting to look like that, but that want, I suppose. Yeah. So it's really interesting that it's so intertwined into that, and we're kind of accepting this addiction to be shoved down our throat, really. Yeah. And we briefly talked about this beforehand, but to present a question, why do we challenge the topics of drugs, alcohol, and pornography, yet we seem to encourage more sugar and one more hour of social media and another commercial and one more TV show?
Good point. Except I would argue we don't stigmatize, is that the right word? Yeah. We don't stigmatize pornography enough.
Yeah.
And that it's generally accepted. I have this, again, perfect segue to probably the most, the biggest hot take of what I wanted to say. In the description, I made the claim that we live in a society that almost encourages addictions in a certain way. And we've obviously touched on some of that, but I think modern society has promulgated the absurd notion that whatever makes you happy must be good for you, no matter how temporary that happiness is, or regardless of what kind of fulfillment it gives you, when in reality you don't become happy by pursuing happiness. You become happy as a side effect of pursuing meaning. And
well, to add on to that, there's an incredible amount of how to be happy books.
Yeah.
Particularly in the United States, actually, which is another fact from Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, which I will never stop quoting because it's amazing. But there are an incredible amount of those books and guides and pamphlets, and yet more often than not, directly trying to get to happiness will give you just the opposite.
It doesn't work.
Because as soon as you do that, you'll almost always imagine happiness and pleasure, if you will, as this island of joy and happiness in a utopia where no one's ever sad, which is not real.
No.
There's no such thing as that. And it will always set you up for failure. Thus, you will never achieve what you're wanting. And this ties back to our goals episode in that it's a goal that is, one, too high, and two, is inachievable.
Absolutely. And I'm about to take a jab at the psychological world.
Oh boy.
In that they would claim, most psychologists would probably claim that they agree with that notion, but then the second anyone is feeling depressed or claims that they have some mental illness, they will prescribe medicine and antidepressants. Dare I compare it to Soma from Brave New World?
You're always on top of what I'm gonna say. Yeah, in Brave New World, the Soma is the miracle drug that if you're sad or feeling down, you take the drug and everything goes away and you're back to your happy life.
Yeah, and in the novel, it's very much framed as it's the easy way out to achieve temporary satisfaction. But
well, from a truly pragmatic sense, if you have an issue where you're unhappy, to go entirely pragmatic here and not think long term, would it not make more sense to take Soma than to not?
Probably.
Exactly.
If you're only thinking short term.
When, by comparison, if you're coming from a more humanistic psychological approach, it's more about that self-actualization of long-term growth, and doing that might help you, but more often than not, it'll only pull you back and force you to become dependent upon that.
And to go to, I guess, the second facet of why I say we live in a society that is okay with addiction, that trivializes addiction, are just in social settings. Like, a lot of times you'll see these at college. I have a few like fake quotes written down that a lot of people have probably heard in their life if they've ever been surrounded by the wrong people. It would be, quote, just one more drink, it'll take the edge off, you'll have a good time tonight. That kind of thing. Yeah. You'll be able to talk to the opposite sex tonight, even though you can't because you're Generation Z and you're bad at that stuff.
I didn't prepare an entire speech for this short small talk. Yeah, I mean, that's the same as the just one cigarette. Just one. I was going to make some other analogy, but then I realized I'm not very well versed in the terms.
Just hit the blunt, dude. Just hit the joint.
We'll go with that.
You know?
The dad pen?
Yeah. It's not as bad as those other drugs, and it'll get you out of this slump, you know, man?
And I will say, there is something to be said about using... Just hear me out here, okay?
Okay.
There is something to be said about using a substance, particularly, most notably, alcohol, to relieve some stress. I mean, think of... The joke is that teachers all have a glass of wine when they get home because students, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't blame them at all for that. And to a degree, that is okay, I will say. Even with some drugs, while they are illegal, and I don't say go do them, please... guys, you can't sue me. This is not any kind of legal advice. Do not do this, okay? While they are dangerous, I will say in small doses and safely used, they are interestingly fine. which is why you see such a massive push for marijuana at public use.
I mean, I have heard the notion, especially of musicians who get high when they're writing music in order to boost creativity, or in extreme cases doing acid or something like that.
I will say though, as a composer myself, and after speaking to so many people, knowing that that's what it takes for someone to write something good, what that means is that they can only do that when on said drug.
Ooh, yes.
Which
Segue.
Oh boy. You're always on top of it. But that one says that they don't have the natural capability to make something good without assistance, if you will. And I feel like that's kind of cheating when compared with John Williams, who writes astounding soundtracks. Probably without acid. I mean, he's 80. It probably would kill him.
So, segue.
Oh boy, that's 3 today. We got a tally chart.
I think this I guess could be another hot take, but if you need drugs or alcohol to appear interesting at a party or to attract the opposite sex, you're not that interesting or attractive.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. Yeah, if that's what it takes, that's definitely not the case. Yeah, much like the whole notion of writing a piece of music, you don't want that to be your character trait, if you will. You want to have a firm character and a firm build of identity and personality, so that an addiction isn't what defines you, because then that's all you'll ever be. Yeah. For example, John Coltrane, who, if you don't know, is a incredibly famous jazz saxophonist, is well renowned for his playing.
Yeah.
Very, very astounding. If you've ever heard of Giant Steps, that's him. It's a very difficult jazz piece, and I do not want to play it because it's very hard. But there are numerous accounts of him selling his own instrument to get drugs. And I will say, in this case, it's interesting because you see that he has this firm identity and this firm character outside of that. And yes, that is a terrible thing, but fortunately he had this character to rely on and demonstrate why he is an important musician, and still is regarded as that way today. He always is tagged along with the drug user tag, and that is his fault, of course. But because he had that firm base to work with, it's not the main defining fact. And I feel that's the main issue with people, if you will, fantasizing addictions. And I think you have some more on this, and we'll probably segue again to it. But if you're seeing someone that you admire and that's their defining trait, that's what really gets you in. It's not so much of I want to do the drug or I want to be their friend. It's that I want to be like them.
In his case, I think it helps that he had many saxophones to sell. Most people don't have multi-$1,000 instruments to just sell for drug money.
Yeah, but he would famously sell it to a pawn shop, tell them to hold on to it, bring him money a couple weeks later and a little more rugged, and get it back. And then die young. I think he died around his 30s and 40s. I forget exactly.
Well, that's interesting because I would say do you know what he died of?
I do not.
Okay. I probably shouldn't say anything, but if it was the case that he died of a drug overdose or complications due to drugs, think about how much more music he could have written. Think of how much more of an impact, even with as much as he did.
Absolutely. I do not know for sure, but I'm confident that it was some overdose.
Okay.
Just because that would make the most sense for him, particularly in how young he died. So that was a fun tangent.
Wow, we got way off. I am being told he died of liver cancer.
There you go. How old does it say? Okay. Oh, that's
It's 40.
40. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So pretty young.
Thank you, editor
yeah.
person.
Yeah. And liver cancer, if I'm not mistaken, thank you, yes, is particularly associated with alcohol, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Which ties back into that and makes, while it wasn't an overdose per se, I feel like it's still related to that context. What now?
Where to next?
You have more notes than me.
We kind of rushed through it all.
So
We haven't. Go.
Oh, so I would bring it then here to social media, because that's the one that really sticks out from our list of them, in that it's again not a physical thing you do or take, or I suppose watch as pornography is, and then apply. Apply. But social media is something, it's different in its own way. It's a medium through which you do things through the medium. And this is where I feel comes back the notion of that attention.
Yeah.
Particularly in the use of depression.
Yeah. As
attention.
If
we want to go into that.
Yeah, there's a plethora of evidence that points to social media as a primary cause of these mental illnesses that are so rampant today.
Really, a cause of? How so?
Well, I guess the cliche one would be, since people only post either the best or worst of their lives on social media, people compare themselves in that way.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Like, particularly in that, like, someone posts something really good and then it, like, others compare themselves to that.
Yeah.
And feel lesser, if you will.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it also would have to do with people posting, like, how messed up the world is. Mm-hmm. And that can lead to people feeling, obviously, a little upset about the state of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly when you're constantly being bombarded with continual information about how terrible the world is, that presents a very simple and very evil presentation of the world. Mm-hmm. Again, another thing I talked about in Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death is that the case where, because of our pictorial and televised world, we only see the most intense, the most exciting, the most scary things that we see instead of everything. Mm-hmm. Which does, I feel, and as Postman writes, it presents the world as something that is unchangeable and set to die. When I don't think it is.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of people fight for change and all that stuff and different things to happen. And
well, it's gotten to the point where you have to be so sensational when making claims that you have to talk in absolutes, mm-hmm. or no one will be scared or angry enough to act on what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Again, tying back to how using your pathetic emotions to get to you, anger particularly, in politics. Mm-hmm. Again, those television advertisements for or against politicians are almost always built on arguments against the other politician, trying to enrage you in some form, mm-hmm. Or make you frustrated, rather, sometimes.
You got anything else? That was a short one.
That was a little short. I don't think I have anything, unless you have any other main points or any questions from the chat up here.
I don't believe we have anything.
You people are too quiet.
I know.
Sigh. Tisk, tisk, tot. Well, I think we'll call it there.
Yeah.
A little shorter episode today, but the makeup for last episode being a little longer than it was supposed to be. But, mm-hmm. If you haven't watched episode 5 on Amusing Ourselves to Death, definitely do so. It's mm-hmm. a very packed video. Mm-hmm. I still would stress read the book. And if you guys ever have questions, please reach out. Questions, comments.
possible topics.
Possible topics are always welcome. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, all those different things.
Mm-hmm.
We now have an Instagram and Twitter, so you can follow those. It's just our channel name.
Of course, he typed the number 2 instead of the word 2.
Okay, our logo has the number 2 in it.
Okay, but our
Do you want me to change it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll change
it. Bothers me.
I'll change it just for you.
Thank you.
There's your addiction.
And in probably around episode 10, we've got something big planned for episode 10, including a special guest.
You say that like he said yes.
Well,
I haven't even reached out to him yet.
I'm banking on him saying yes.
Okay.
If not, we'll find some other big thing to do for episode 10.
Our editor really wants to be in an episode. No. But yes, always stay tuned. We have lots of great plans coming up.
For the 2 existential dudes, I am Luke.
And I am Andrew.
Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.